All right, welcome to the Explainer. For a minute, I want you to just forget everything you think you know about global power. You know, all those maps with alliances and military bases. Today, we're going to dig into something deeper, the hidden physics of power. We're talking about the invisible forces that really determine if a country, or a whole block of countries, is stable or if it's about to crack under pressure.
So you hear it all the time, right? This idea of a new Cold War 2.0 with the US, China, Russia. But here's the thing. The old playbook just doesn't work anymore. You know, counting tanks and planes, it's not the whole story. This quote here really gets to the heart of it. It says, the winners won't be the ones who are just the toughest, but the ones who build these zones that can take a punch, that can move fast, and that can keep people on board. It's about resilience, not just brute force. But what does that actually mean in the real world?
Okay, so here's the big idea. The world isn't just a collection of countries with alliances anymore. It's reorganizing into what we're going to call zones of control. And you can think of these as, well, like massive bubbles of influence. They're held together by way more than just a treaty on a piece of paper. We're talking shared technology, the same financial networks, the way information flows, and maybe most importantly, a powerful, unifying story that everyone inside that bubble believes in.
So that's the puzzle we're trying to solve here. If the world is made of these zones, how do you even measure which ones are strong and which are weak? I mean, why is it that some of them can take hit after hit and just keep going, while others seem to fracture at the first sign of trouble? Is it just about having the biggest army or the most money? Or is there something else going on, something deeper that we're missing?
Well, to get at those deeper forces, we need a new toolkit, and that's where this framework comes in. It's called the Zonal Coherence Model, or ZCM for short. And honestly, the best way to think about it is like a new physics for global power. It gives us the variables, the formulas, to actually measure those hidden forces that make a zone either stable and resilient or brittle and just waiting for a crisis.
So, first things first, what exactly is a zone in this model? It's not just a colored-in area on a map. Think of it more like a massive control system. Its main job is to coordinate everything, people, money, resources, so it can handle major shocks. You know, things like a pandemic, a financial crash, or a big military threat. But, and this is the absolute key, a strong zone can do all of this without constantly having to use force. Its real power comes from everyone pulling in the same direction, not from being forced to.
So how do you get that kind of internal strength, that coherence? Well, the model says it rests on three pillars. The first one is narrative. We'll just call it N. This is the big story. It's the shared belief system, the identity of the zone. It's the answer to the question, what are we all doing here together? A powerful narrative gives people a reason to belong, a reason to believe in the system. It makes everything feel like it has a purpose.
Okay, pillar number 2, coordination, or C. If narrative is the why, coordination is the how. This is the nuts and bolts, the actual machinery of the zone. We're talking laws, government agencies, tech platforms, all of it. A zone with high coordination can make decisions and get things done fast, especially when a crisis hits. It's all about speed and efficiency.
And that brings us to the third and final pillar, trust, or T. This one's huge. It's the belief deep down that the rules are fair, the system works, and the future is basically secure. When you have high trust, people play by the rules because they want to. They believe in the system. But when trust collapses, well, that's when people start looking for a way out, protecting themselves, and the whole thing starts to fray at the edges.
So there you have it, the three pillars of a strong zone: narrative, coordination, and trust. You add those all together, and you get the zone's total coherence score. Now this is where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the core formula of this whole model, the simple equation that shows us the exact tipping point between a zone that's stable and one that's about to fly apart.
And here it is. It's actually super simple, but incredibly powerful. On one side, you've got your coherence. That's your narrative plus coordination plus trust. On the other side, you've got a shock, some big crisis. As long as your coherence is greater than the shock, you're stable. The system bends, sure, but it holds. But the moment that shock becomes bigger than your coherence, the system becomes unstable. It can't cope, and it has to reach for its last resort, brute force, what the model calls enforcement.
Now, this is maybe the single most important idea in this whole model. We tend to think that when a government uses force, crackdowns, sanctions, military deployments, that it's a sign of strength. But this model flips that on its head. It argues that relying on force is actually a sign of deep weakness, and it leads to a very dangerous situation called the enforcement trap.
So let's just trace how this deadly cycle works. Step 1, a huge shock hits the zone.
Step 2, the zone's coherence, its story, its systems, its trust. It's just not strong enough to absorb the hit. So, step 3, it hits the panic button and cranks up enforcement just to keep control. But here's the chop. Step 4, every time you use force, you damage your narrative and you absolutely shred trust. So, step 5, you might have survived this one crisis, but you're now weaker and even more fragile for the next shock that comes along. It's a classic downward spiral.
And this quote just nails it. Force without coherence is not strategy. It is burn rate. Think about that. When a zone has to rely on force, it's not being strategic. It's just burning through its most precious resource, the trust and belief of its people. It's basically trading its long-term future for a little bit of control right now. And over time, that is a game you can't win.
Okay, that's the theory. And it's a pretty powerful way to look at the world, right? But now let's make it real. Let's take this model and actually apply it to the major global powers. How do they really stack up when you look at them through this lens? It's time to build a whole new kind of global scorecard.
So just to see how this works, let's zoom in on just one of those variables, coordination. How fast can these zones actually get stuff done? And wow, the differences are huge. The model gives China a really high score here. It can mobilize its entire system at incredible speed. The US? It's okay, but a lot slower. And the EU? Well, its system is built on getting 27 countries to agree, which creates what the model calls orchestration latency. That's a fancy way of saying it's incredibly slow, which is a massive problem when things are moving fast.
All right, let's pull back and look at the full scorecard. So first, you've got coherence capacity. That's just N, C, and T all added up. Then you have enforcement reliance risk. That's a measure of how likely a zone is to fall into that downward spiral we talked about. And finally, the zone stability index, which kind of puts it all together. And right away, you can see China and the US are out in front, but for very different reasons. And you can also see the EU score really highlights those structural problems we just mentioned. So, what are the big takeaways here? Well, for China, its strength is clearly that internal speed and cohesion. But its big weakness? It really struggles to get other countries to trust it. For the USA, it's got this amazing foundation of power, but its biggest danger is internal. The narrative is so polarized, it's tearing the country's coherence apart. The EU? It's like a gentle giant, with a strong foundation, but it's just too slow to react. And then there's India, which is the really fascinating one. The model sees it as a rising swing zone, with a growing narrative and great demographics, making it a really critical player to watch.
And all of this leaves us with a final, really important question to think about. We know the world is only getting crazier, with shocks coming faster and faster. This model gives you a brand new way to understand it all. So next time you're watching the news and you see a major world event, ask yourself this: is what's happening building up that zone's narrative, coordination, and trust? Or is it just another desperate act of enforcement, burning down long-term stability for short-term control? Because the answer to that question, well, that's what will tell you who's actually winning the future.